Before you listen to this story, imagine arriving in a town where every door is locked before midnight, not because of crime, not because of danger from other people, but because of something far older, something that has been hunting in the forests surrounding the town for centuries, and the people who live there know exactly when it comes out. This story begins with a journalist named Michael Carter. Michael worked for an investigative online magazine that specialized in strange and unexplained stories. Over the years, he had traveled to dozens of places that were rumored to be haunted, cursed, or mysterious. Most of the time, the stories turned out to be exaggerated, old ghost legends. Local myths told to scare tourists, but Michael loved chasing those stories anyway, because every once in a while something real appeared, something that couldn't be easily explained. One rainy evening, Michael sat alone in his apartment in London, scrolling through emails sent by readers who claimed to have encountered something unusual. Most messages were nonsense. Blurry photos of shadows, stories about strange noises in old houses. Then one message caught his attention. The subject line read, "Do not come here during the full moon." Michael clicked the email. The message inside was short, very short. It read, "Our town locks every door when the full moon rises. Anyone left outside disappears. If you want to know the truth, come to Velmora." Below the message was a location. A tiny village somewhere in Eastern Europe. Michael frowned slightly. The email contained no name, no explanation, just those 3 sentences. Normally, he would have ignored it. But then he noticed the attachments, 3 photographs. Michael opened the first one. It showed a quiet village street. Small wooden houses stood on both sides of a narrow road. Flower boxes decorated several windows, and tall pine trees surrounded the entire village. Mountains rose in the distance. It looked peaceful, almost too peaceful. Michael opened the second photo. This one was taken at night. The same street appeared completely empty. No lights in the windows, no people outside. Every house looked dark, silent, like the entire village had vanished. Michael leaned closer to the screen. Something about the atmosphere in the photo felt strange, almost unnatural. Then he opened the third image and immediately felt a chill. The photo showed the same street again, but this time something stood in the middle of the road, a creature. At first glance it looked like a wolf. But the longer Michael stared at the image, the more unsettling it became. The creature was standing upright, like a human. Its long arms hung beside its body. Its legs were bent slightly backward, and its head tilted toward the camera. The moon illuminated its face just enough to reveal its eyes. They reflected the camera flash like an animal's. But its mouth looked like it was smiling, not like an animal, like something that understood it was being watched. Michael leaned back in his chair. He had seen many fake photos before. Photoshopped ghosts, edited monsters, but something about this image felt different. The lighting looked natural. The shadows were correct. Nothing appeared digitally altered. If the photo was fake, it was extremely well made. Michael checked the metadata attached to the file. The photo had been taken just 3 weeks earlier. Location, Velmora. Michael opened a map and searched for the village. It took a moment before the name appeared. Velmora was tiny, barely more than a cluster of houses hidden deep in the mountains. The nearest city was almost 4 hours away, which meant very few tourists ever visited. Michael leaned forward again and studied the photo of the creature. His mind raced with possibilities. Maybe it was a costume, maybe someone staged the photo as a joke, or maybe it was something else. Michael looked back at the email message. "Anyone left outside disappears." He checked the lunar calendar on his phone. The next full moon would occur in 4 days. Michael smiled slightly. This was exactly the kind of mystery his readers loved. Strange town, local legend, mysterious creature. If there was even a small chance the story was real, it would make an incredible article. Without hesitating further, Michael opened a travel website and searched for flights to Eastern Europe. Within minutes, he had booked a ticket. 2 days later, he would arrive in a country whose language he barely spoke. Then he would rent a car and drive into the mountains, straight to the village of Velmora. A place where every door locked before midnight, and where something in the forest howled whenever the full moon rose. Michael shut his laptop and leaned back in his chair. Outside his apartment window, the rain continued falling against the glass. The city lights reflected on the wet streets below. For a moment he wondered who had sent the email and why they had chosen him, but the excitement of the mystery quickly pushed the thought away. He had no idea that the message had not been an invitation, it had been a warning. And by the time Michael Carter realized that, he would already be standing in the middle of a village that had spent centuries hiding a terrifying secret. A secret that revealed itself only once every month, when the moon became full, and the people of Velmora locked every door because they knew exactly what was waiting outside. 2 days later, Michael Carter stepped out of a small rental car and stared at the road ahead of him. The mountains surrounding Velmora were far larger than he expected. Dark pine forests covered the slopes like a thick blanket, stretching endlessly toward the horizon. The air was colder here, and a quiet mist drifted between the trees. The GPS on his dashboard had stopped working almost 10 minutes ago. From that point on, the road had become narrow and winding, barely wide enough for 2 cars to pass. Michael drove slowly. He hadn't seen another vehicle for nearly 30 minutes. Eventually, the forest began to thin, and then he saw it, Velmora. The village appeared suddenly between the trees, as if it had been hiding there all along. It was small, much smaller than the photos suggested. A single main road cut through the center of the town. Old wooden houses stood on both sides, their roofs darkened by years of snow and rain. Flower boxes sat beneath several windows, but most of them were empty. Michael parked near a small town square and stepped out of the car. The air smelled like pine and damp earth. For a moment, everything seemed peaceful. Children rode bicycles across the square. A few villagers walked slowly along the road. An elderly man sat on a bench feeding crumbs to pigeons. It looked like any quiet mountain village, but something felt off. The people noticed him immediately. Several villagers turned their heads the moment he stepped out of the car. Their expressions were not hostile, but they were cautious, curious. As if strangers rarely visited Velmora, Michael grabbed his camera from the passenger seat and began walking through the square. He took a few photos of the buildings, old stone walls, wooden balconies, a church tower rising at the far end of the road. The architecture looked centuries old, perfect for his article, but while he walked, he began noticing strange details. Almost every house had heavy metal locks on the doors, some windows had iron bars, and several doors were reinforced with thick wooden planks. It didn't look like protection against thieves. It looked like protection against something trying to get in. Michael frowned slightly. He continued walking until he found the village hotel. The building stood near the edge of town. It was a modest 2-story structure with faded paint and a wooden sign that read, Velmora. Inside, the lobby was quiet. A small fireplace crackled gently in the corner. Behind the front desk stood a woman in her early 40s. Her dark hair was tied back neatly and her expression was calm but serious. When she saw Michael enter, she gave a polite nod. "Welcome to Velmora," she said. Michael smiled. "Hi, I'd like a room for a few nights." The woman typed something into the computer. "Of course," she glanced at his passport. "Michael Carter, yes, you're visiting alone," Michael nodded. "I'm a journalist. I'm writing about small European villages." The woman paused. Her fingers stopped moving on the keyboard. "A journalist?" she asked quietly. "Yes." She studied him carefully. Then she asked a strange question. "How long are you planning to stay?" Michael shrugged. "Maybe 3 or 4 days." The woman's expression changed slightly. "You should leave tomorrow." Michael blinked. "Leave? Yes. Why?" She looked toward the hotel window for a moment. Outside, the sky was slowly turning orange as the sun began to set behind the mountains. "Tomorrow night is the full moon," she said. Michael chuckled lightly. "That sounds like a festival." The woman did not smile. "In Velmora, it is not a celebration." Michael leaned casually against the desk. "What happens during the full moon?" The woman hesitated. For several seconds, she seemed to debate whether she should answer. Finally, she spoke again. "Every house in this town locks their doors before midnight." Michael raised an eyebrow. "That's normal in most places." She shook her head slowly. "No, this town locks their doors for a different reason." Michael felt his curiosity growing. And what reason is that? The woman lowered her voice slightly. Because no one wants to be outside when the moon rises. Michael waited for her to continue, but she didn't. Instead, she handed him a key, room 12. Michael took the key but didn't move. What happens to people who stay outside? He asked. The woman finally looked directly into his eyes. And the seriousness in her expression made Michael's smile disappear. They disappear, Michael laughed nervously. You're joking. I am not. Animals, she didn't answer. Instead, she said something that made the room suddenly feel colder. You should stay inside tomorrow night. And if you hear something outside, her voice dropped to a whisper. Do not open the door. Michael stared at her for a moment, then he forced a small smile. I think I'll take my chances. The woman's face showed no amusement. As Michael walked toward the stairs with his suitcase, he could feel her eyes following him. Outside the hotel window, the sun finally disappeared behind the mountains. And somewhere deep in the forest surrounding Velmora, something howled. Michael spent the rest of the afternoon exploring Velmora. The deeper he walked into the village, the more he noticed the same strange pattern. Every house had reinforced doors, heavy locks, thick wooden shutters covering the windows. It looked less like a village and more like a place preparing for a siege. By early evening, the sky above the mountains turned dark orange. The air became colder. Most villagers had already begun returning to their homes. Shops closed earlier than expected. Street lights flickered on one by one along the main road. Michael eventually found the only bar in Velmora, a small wooden building with a faded sign hanging above the door. Inside, the atmosphere was quiet. Only 4 people sat at the tables. An old radio played soft music in the background. Michael sat at the counter and ordered a drink. The bartender barely spoke, but after a few minutes, someone pulled out the chair beside him. Michael turned. A tall man with a thick beard and worn leather jacket sat down. The man looked like someone who spent most of his life outdoors. You're not from here, the man said. Michael smiled. That obvious? The man nodded. You're the journalist. Michael was surprised. How did you know? The man lifted his glass. In a town this small, everyone notices when a stranger arrives. He extended his hand. My name is Lucas. Michael shook it. Michael Carter. Lucas took a slow sip of his drink before speaking again. You came because of the full moon. Michael raised an eyebrow. So it's true then? What is the stories? Lucas didn't answer immediately. Instead, he stared at the wooden counter for a long moment, then he spoke quietly. You hear them first. Michael leaned forward. Hear what? The howling. A chill moved through Michael's spine. Wolves. Lucas shook his head slowly. If only it were that simple. He glanced toward the bar window. Outside, the sky was almost dark now. You'll hear it tomorrow night, Lucas continued. It begins deep in the forest, one howl, then another, and another, until the entire valley echoes with it. Michael studied Lucas carefully. And that's when everyone locks their doors, yes, and if someone does, Lucas finally looked directly into his eyes, they don't come back. Michael forced a small laugh. You're talking about wild animals, but Lucas didn't laugh. Instead, he leaned slightly closer. What I'm talking about used to be human. The bar suddenly felt colder. Michael waited for Lucas to continue, but the hunter only finished his drink and stood up. Before leaving, he placed a rough hand on Michael's shoulder. You should leave Velmora before tomorrow night, Lucas said. Michael smiled politely. I came here for the story. Lucas shook his head. You came here for the wrong one, Michael frowned. What does that mean? Lucas walked toward the door. Just before stepping outside, he turned back one last time, and the expression on his face carried no trace of humor. It means, Lucas said quietly, you're not the first journalist who came looking for answers. The door closed behind him. Michael sat alone at the counter. For the first time since arriving in Velmora, he began to wonder if the email warning had been serious after all. Outside, somewhere far beyond the dark forest, a long, distant howl echoed through the mountains. Michael returned to the hotel later that night, but Lucas's words continued echoing in his mind. What I'm talking about used to be human. The statement sounded ridiculous. Werewolves belonged in horror movies and old folklore, not in a real mountain village. Yet something about Velmora felt undeniably strange. The reinforced doors, the nervous villagers, the way everyone avoided talking about the full moon. Michael sat on the edge of his bed and opened his laptop. If Velmora truly had a history connected to legends of wolves, there had to be some record of it somewhere. He began searching. Old newspapers, historical archives, regional folklore. After nearly an hour, he finally found something. A brief article written nearly 80 years earlier. The title read, "Strange Disappearances in Velmora Continue." Michael leaned closer to the screen. The article described a series of mysterious events that had occurred in the village decades ago. Several residents had vanished during the same night. Search parties had found nothing except strange footprints in the forest, footprints that looked like wolves but were far too large. And in some cases, the tracks began as human footprints before slowly transforming into animal ones. Michael felt a cold sensation run down his spine. He kept reading. The article mentioned an even older legend told by the villagers. According to the story, centuries ago Velmora had been cursed after a hunter killed a massive wolf deep in the mountains. The creature was said to be no ordinary animal. Some believed it was a spirit of the forest. Others believed it was something darker. But when the hunter killed it, the curse spread. Those bitten by wolves during the full moon began to change. First came the sickness, then the strange cravings, and eventually the transformation. Michael closed the laptop slowly. The idea sounded impossible, yet every piece of evidence pointed in the same direction. Velmora wasn't just afraid of wolves, the villagers were afraid of themselves. Michael stood and walked toward the window. Outside, the forest surrounding the town looked darker than before. The full moon would rise tomorrow night. And suddenly Michael realized something unsettling. Tomorrow, he might finally see the truth behind the legend. But deep down, another thought quietly formed in his mind. What if the villagers weren't locking their doors to keep something out? What if they were locking them to keep something in? The next day in Velmora felt different. When Michael stepped outside the hotel that morning, the village looked the same as before. The mountains still surrounded the town like silent giants, and the narrow road still ran through the center between rows of old wooden houses. But the people had changed. There was a tension in the air that hadn't been there the day before. Villagers moved quickly through the streets, finishing errands earlier than usual. Shop owners closed their stores before sunset. Even the children who had been playing in the square yesterday were nowhere to be seen. It felt as if the entire town was preparing for something. Michael walked through the square with his camera, taking photos and observing the unusual behavior. At one house, he saw a man reinforcing his front door with thick wooden beams. Across the street, a woman carefully locked every window of her home. Another family hurried inside while carrying several lanterns. None of them seemed willing to explain what they were doing. When Michael tried asking a few questions, the villagers only shook their heads or ignored him entirely. One elderly woman finally whispered something as she passed him. "Go inside before the moon rises." Then she walked away quickly. By late afternoon, the sky had turned gray and dark clouds drifted slowly over the mountains. Michael returned to the hotel. The lobby was empty except for Alina behind the front desk. She looked up the moment he entered. "You're still here," she said quietly. Michael smiled. "I told you." "I came for the story." Alina didn't return the smile. "You should stay in your room tonight." "I plan to go outside," Michael replied casually. Her expression hardened. "That would be a mistake." Michael leaned on the desk. "I've heard the stories, wolves in the forest, strange howling. But I've covered things like this before." Alina looked at him with a mixture of frustration and concern. "This is not a story for tourists." Michael hesitated. "Then tell me the truth." For a moment it looked like she might answer, but instead she simply shook her head. "The truth will find you tonight," she said. Outside the window, the last light of the sun disappeared behind the mountains. The village quickly fell into darkness. One by one, the lights in the houses turned off. Doors slammed shut. Locks clicked into place. By the time the clock in the hotel lobby struck 10, Velmora looked like an abandoned town. No voices, no movement, only silence. Michael stood by his hotel window with his camera ready. Above the mountains, the clouds slowly moved aside, and then the moon appeared, bright, full. Its pale light spilled across the empty streets of Velmora. For several long minutes, nothing happened. Michael almost laughed at himself. Maybe the villagers had simply scared themselves with old stories. Maybe this entire mystery was nothing more than superstition. Then he heard it, a sound drifting through the forest, low, distant. A long, haunting howl. Michael felt the hairs on his arms stand up. The howl echoed through the valleys, then another answered, and another. Within seconds, the night was filled with the chilling chorus of wolves, but something about the sound felt wrong. These howls were deeper, stronger, almost human. Michael raised his camera slowly. And somewhere at the far end of the dark street, something moved. Michael held his camera tightly as the howling echoed through the mountains. The sound rolled across the valley like thunder. One howl turned into many, deep, primal, terrifying. Michael slowly stepped out of the hotel door and into the empty street. The cold night air wrapped around him instantly. The moon hung high above the mountains, casting a pale silver glow over the quiet village. Velmora looked completely abandoned. Every house was dark, every window sealed. Not a single person stood outside, only Michael. He lifted his camera and pointed it toward the end of the road. The movement he saw earlier had disappeared. For several seconds, nothing happened. Then something stepped out from between the houses. Michael's breath caught in his throat. At first he thought it was a man, tall, broad shoulders, standing upright. But as the creature moved into the moonlight, Michael realized something was horribly wrong. Its body was covered in thick, dark fur. Its legs bent backward like an animal's. Its arms were long and powerful, ending in claws that scraped lightly against the pavement. And its face was unmistakably that of a wolf, but the creature stood on two legs. Michael froze. His heart pounded so hard he could hear it in his ears. The creature slowly lifted its head. Its glowing eyes scanned the empty street, then it stopped. It had seen him. For a moment, neither of them moved. Michael instinctively raised his camera. Click, the camera flash exploded in the darkness. The creature snarled. A deep, violent sound that echoed through the silent town. Then it began walking toward him. Slowly, deliberately, Michael stumbled backward. This isn't real, he whispered. But the creature kept coming. Its claws scratched the pavement with every step, and behind it, more shadows began moving in the darkness. Michael turned and ran. His shoes slammed against the pavement as he sprinted down the empty street. Behind him, he heard it, heavy footsteps, fast, far faster than any human could run. Michael risked a glance over his shoulder. The creature was chasing him, and it was closing the distance quickly. Its long legs moved with terrifying speed. Its mouth hung open, revealing rows of sharp teeth, and its eyes never left him. Michael's lungs burned as he ran toward the hotel, but halfway there he heard another sound, more footsteps. From the side streets, from the alleys, from the darkness between houses, they were everywhere. More creatures, more howls filled the night. Michael realized the horrible truth. The village wasn't surrounded by wolves. The wolves were inside the village. Suddenly, a door burst open beside him. A hand grabbed his jacket and pulled him inside. The door slammed shut. Locks clicked into place. Michael fell onto the floor, gasping for air. When he looked up, Alina stood in front of him. "You're insane," she said. "You went outside." Michael struggled to speak. What are those things?" Alina looked toward the door as a heavy impact shook the wood. Outside, claws scraped against the surface. Her voice trembled. "They're the people of Velmora." Michael stared at Alina in disbelief. "That's impossible." Another heavy thud struck the door. The creature outside growled loudly. Alina grabbed Michael's arm and pulled him deeper into the house. "Quiet," she whispered. They moved into a small room lit by a single lantern. The walls were covered with photographs. Michael walked closer. His stomach tightened. Each photograph showed villagers, men, women, teenagers, but beside every photo was another image. The same person, mid-transformation, bones bending. Faces stretching, teeth becoming fangs. Michael felt sick. "How long has this been happening?" he asked. Alina took a deep breath. "Centuries. The curse began long before any of us were born. Outside, the creature continued scratching at the door. Not everyone in Velmora changes, she continued. Only those who have been bitten, but once it happens, the curse never leaves. Michael looked at the photos again. Then why stay here? Alina's voice grew quiet. Because if we leave, the curse spreads. Suddenly the door cracked, wood splintered under the force of massive claws. The creature outside roared. Alina grabbed a rifle from the wall. Get upstairs, she told Michael. What about you? I'll slow it down. The door burst open. A huge werewolf crashed into the room. Alina fired. The gunshot echoed through the house. The creature staggered but didn't fall. Its eyes locked onto Michael. Then it lunged. Michael tried to run, but the creature's claws struck his arm. Pain exploded through his body. He collapsed to the floor. Alina fired again. This time the creature retreated, jumping back through the broken doorway. The howling outside grew louder. More creatures were approaching. Alina looked down at Michael's bleeding arm. Her face went pale. You've been bitten. Michael's heart stopped. What does that mean? Alina didn't answer. She didn't have to. Outside, the howling became deafening. Morning sunlight slowly spread across Velmora. The village looked peaceful again. Birds sang in the trees. Smoke rose from chimneys. Children walked through the square as if nothing had happened. But Michael Carter was gone. Days later, a search team from a nearby city entered the forest. They found Michael's camera lying near the edge of the woods. The memory card inside still worked. Police reviewed the photos. Most showed the village, the empty streets, the full moon. Then they reached the final image. The photograph showed a group of enormous wolves standing beneath the trees. Their eyes glowed in the darkness. And in the center of the pack stood one creature that looked different. It was taller than the others. Its fur was darker, and its eyes stared directly into the camera. The investigators noticed something strange. The creature's face looked familiar. Almost human. Later that night, the camera disappeared from the evidence room. No one knows who took it. But travelers who pass through the mountains near Velmora sometimes report hearing something strange during the full moon. A camera shutter, click. And if they look into the forest, they might see glowing eyes watching from the darkness, waiting for the next person who stays outside when the moon rises.